Welcome to EU Privacy for All, Session 10 on GDPR, Privacy by Design and by Default, Article 23. Privacy by design was discussed during negotiations because different wordings were retained on the European Parliament side and on EU Council one. European Parliament was referring to the state of the art, current technical knowledge, international best practices. EU Council referred to available technology. European Parliament was also having an assessment based on the obligation that a data controller and a data processor would envisage the entire lifecycle management of personal data. Moreover, where the controller has carried out a data protection impact assessment, the results shall be taken into account according to European Parliament. On EU Council side, the wording used was really close to the directive one. That is to say that the obligation of privacy by design applied to both the time of the determination of the means for processing and the time of the processing itself. Data minimization and pseudonymization were referred to as appropriate steps to be taken to implement technical and organizational measures. The key provision in the GDPR is Article 23 on by design and by default. Paragraph 1 on privacy by design refers to the state of the art and the cost of implementation. It also refers to both the times of the determination of the means for processing and the time of the processing itself. Basically, let's retain that appropriate technical and organizational measures, such as pseudonymization, data minimization, or any kind of necessary safeguards to integrate, are the bread and butter of privacy by design. In paragraph 2, the controller is referred to as having the obligation to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures, so that, by default, only personal data which are necessary for each specific purpose of the processing are processed. Beyond that, data shall not be made accessible without any individual's intervention. An approved certification mechanism can be used to demonstrate compliance on this side. Other interesting provisions are Recital 61, referring to internal policies that should integrate privacy by design and by default principles. Recital 83 also refers, in the frame of the absence of an adequacy decision for transferring data, to the obligation to compensate for the lack of data protection in a third country by some measures among those respecting the principles of data protection by design and by default. Article 43 on transfers by way of binding corporate rules refers also to by design and by default principles. Currently, the directive has a recital 46 mentioning an obligation to take appropriate technical and organizational measures both at the time of the design of the processing system and at the time of the processing itself. As you can notice, the wording really looks like the one finally retained in Article 23, paragraph 1 regarding privacy by design. However, it was presented particularly in order to maintain security and to prevent any unauthorized processing. What should accountable data controllers and processors get prepared for? So first, put in place privacy by design. And it means implementing appropriate technical and organizational measures, the TOMs, at two times. First, the time of the determination of the means for processing. Therefore, pseudonymization, data minimization, and any kind of additional safeguards should be envisaged based on the state of the art, the costs, the nature, scope, context, and purposes of the processing, but also the privacy risks for the data subject. The second time for assessing which appropriate technical and organizational measures should be taken is the time of the processing itself. Privacy by default shall be implemented concretely, having a process of personal data that is restricted to what is strictly necessary for each specific purpose. No personal data shall be made broadly accessible without individuals' intervention. Approved certification mechanism could be used to demonstrate full compliance. And finally, internal policies will help monitor technical and organizational measures taken. A concrete question on the implementation of privacy by design and by default is knowing what the state of the art is and what are acceptable costs assessment. The risks assessment is also key.